What we have found is that there's typically a problem in the way that a lot of this research gets done, and also how people engage with a lot of this kind of content, because there's just so much of it, so much available. So what I thought I'll do is to keep the soft side going, is show you a 2-minute clip by Alan Watts. And Alan Watts just talk about what you desire, and then we'll get into a little bit of the detail just after that. Watch this, and then we can chat about what that means afterwards.
What makes you itch?
I'm not sure how many of Alan Watts' work, but I always enjoy his clarity on things and how he sees the world. And if you think of happiness and what people truly desire and not desire, is a complex topic as it is, isn't it? And if you just go to Google, and this is always a great response because Google publishes these kind of short snippets, but if you had to say the number of people that are unhappy, it will quickly give you a result and say to you that more people are unhappy out there than the people that are happy. They feel about the world very differently than what we think they feel about. This is what's coming out. So 86% of Americans are pretty unhappy. It's the lowest since the earlier 70s. And there are studies in Europe showing the same, and nobody cares about Africa. Basically, it is because why should anybody be thinking about this other than the companies who are going to try to solve this problem for you? So what you've seen is that 80% of customers have stopped doing business with companies because they feel that their customers have bad experience, or the fact that they were unhappy with the service. So we know that it is a truly dominant and a prominent topic, and it affects our lives, but yet there's such limited kind of research, especially in the world of computational social science. What we're seeing is that if so many people are unhappy, and we know that we are definitely not happier than what we used to be before, what is being done, and how do we see this? What is the research that's showing us, and what are we doing about it? What are the interventions and the nudges and all the actions that we need to take to solve this problem? So that means that we don't know what the symptoms and the causes are. We have no understanding, because most of the work that gets done in this space is the fact that it's qualitative. We kind of extrapolate based on what we think is happening around us rather than what the real facts are. So the research in the field basically shows that happiness as a subject cover very few true social quantitative factors, but it's mostly around the fact that we studied the general concepts. We're generalizing what we think is happening from the observation of a researcher. We know that in the quantitative research view, we know that there's research across geography and time periods, and trying to understand with most of the world happiness studies that there are changes from time to time. And we know that during the pandemic, there were enormous kind of changes in a lot of those metrics at a quantitative level. At a qualitative level, things like culture and identity and emotions are almost impossible in the context of traditional research to extrapolate, because all those studies purely qualitatively extrapolated from a particular situation. And we think that you need to rethink that and find an hypothesis that you can potentially calculate happiness from data points that are being created, so that you can truly find out if people are in a state of mind that you think that they are in. So the other thing is that there is a discipline. And if you think of behavioral economics, the original name is the happiness economics. It's basically saying that there's the world of economics, and if you include the human, and the human is happy, the human will spend more. And I think that is the basis of how a lot of our research is driven today, is the fact that the only truly objective measure that we have at the moment is spending. And if you think of places like the US and Europe, Canada, Australia, or even in most parts of Africa, regions like these, you have only that measure. You measure a country's success on its ability to produce and get its participants to participate actively. So the challenges are these. If you had to think about happiness in the context of a social problem, is that the Oxford Handbook of Happiness give a specific description saying that the most comprehensive handbook of happiness ever published is psychological, philosophical, evolutionary, economic, spiritual, and then they publish nothing about social science. So they give you this broad spectrum of how they think the world of happiness works, because happiness, according to most of this research, is a psychological individual phenomena. So it's almost like you cannot be happy as a society or a small collective in the context of some of the ways in which this is seen. In the American Journal of Sociology, it says it's the most comprehensive handbook on happiness ever published, but it only includes a handful of views. In actual fact, in some of the books, it doesn't include any sociological research or critique on the specific topic of happiness. And then being a complete reference guide has no mention of any form of social science. That means there is no mention of how a collective or even the context of a family unit, how it feels about its happiness as a collective and the influence of members of, say, a family on each other. And then the World Book of Happiness, they've got 100 plus researchers across countries all over the world, and they only have a few sociological contributions. There are only a handful of papers published showing you the fact that, hang on, maybe there should be a dimension in the context of social science that should be considered. So we now know that if you think of the kind of two opposite ends of the humanities, the field of how we see the individual psychologically as an individual is fairly well researched, an enormous amount of work going into that. We see the world of anthropology and the understanding of broader societal shifts. We see that the World Happiness Study will tell us at a very broad spectrum what's going on, but there's very little work being done around just saying how a particular community will function. Now, in the business world, it's not quite like that because there's a big focus on customer happiness and employee happiness and fields like those that we don't really reference here today. We can maybe have that in one of our follow-up meetups, talk about that as a specific kind of focus. So let's just think about the history. You know, the Durkheim, from his very early days of talking about global consciousness, had this whole construct that social cohesion is really something that is the basis of how you feel about your life and the basis of happiness. So that means that you will often measure how you feel and how happy you are in relation to other people. So that means that we need measures and we need data points to understand how people feel in relation to others. And I think that's why the world behind social media and so on have become so prominent in the world we live in today. Is because the way that we sometimes measure if we are important or if we fit is by purely looking at how other people see us. And that means that it's a very narrow focus on a very few companies controlling a lot of those data points. So the other part of it is if you think of the whole intellectual and moral crisis that people sit with and saying that, do you think that an entire society is in pursuit of happiness? Because if you think of in the world study of happiness, there's one study that shows that Costa Rica at the moment is the most happy society in the world, and there's another study showing that maybe there's other societies in the East that are the happiest societies, and they're all conflicting. They don't give us a view exactly as to what makes that community really happy. The other thing is that Simmel, as a researcher, focused almost entirely on individualism. He says that if you feel that you are important as an individual in a society, you will be happy. So that means that if you go to school and your friends like you, you're happy. If you're in a family and you get along with your family members, you're happy. So the focus is very much on individualism. Weber was really much focused on this kind of ethic around the fact that it's the choices that you take, and then what you do is you want to give people a way in which they can think for themselves and they can drive their own thinking. And then Marx is probably one of the most classics. He basically said that capitalism and the whole focus on alienation clearly make people unhappy. Because if you think about it, in the social sciences, you got one part of the world that researched happiness up until probably, about 100 years ago, 80 years ago. And then you got in a modern world, most people only researching what makes people unhappy as a focus. So that means in the social sciences, from a traditional point of view, it's almost like we are brought up to say that there is no other goal in life that commands such a higher degree of consensus, and that is the fact that all that you are in pursuit of is a happy life. So that means that you're almost being brought up and being educated that this is what you're supposed to focus on, even though you might be a personality that if you are unhappy about something, you might actually feel pretty happy. That there is no definition that describes that or that understands that. So that means that, sociologists and the social sciences is really interested in human behavior. And that means that if you take the behavior, is there a way that you can match various types of emotions? So that means that is there a way in which we can drive some connection between those two, and is there a way in which we can give answers around those two? And most sociologists will think that the study of happiness is really just somebody that is like a whimsical state of mind. It's immeasurable and it's pointless because we can't create a specific angle that can give us some kind of quantitative view on it. And then at the end of it, just like love, happiness is knowable only intuitively at the level of feeling. And that's what is quite common in the social science world. It's basically saying that this is unresearchable. Why are you even attempting to solve this problem? If you look at even before that, early days of going from the 60s into early modern life, the whole concept was around, is there a way that we can understand how people can get to a state of happiness. So if we had to run this survey that we ran earlier with people who were refugees, or we had to run it with people that came out of a war-stricken community, or people who are incredibly poor and couldn't put food on their table this morning, or people who have just been hurt, or people who have been affected by some condition, what would the result be? And what would you be able to do to alter their situation? What nudge, intervention, interaction would you be able to put in place to alter their state of mind to move into something else? So The Art of Life, published probably around the 70s, talks about the fact that consumerism promised a happy life. That means that you go do some shopping and you spend some money and you'll be happy because you'll be able to get some more goods that you've got no idea what to do with it, but you'll be able to get all of this additional, product that has been designed to enlighten you, and you'll be able to have a happy life. So we're kind of seeing that you're trapped in this endless search for a better life. That's that whole pursuit, and how do you deal with that? The other thing is that we want to make sure that we understand what the socioeconomic conditions are and how we handle those socioeconomic conditions. And then how do you deal with the kind of research that normally would need to take place if you wanted to research, as an example, your employees feel, how your family feels, how your clients feel about what they are engaging with you on, and are they happy or not? And obviously, there are a number of studies that give us some view on how that works. But I think that the biggest and primary thing in the world of social science is that there's this preoccupation with misery. It means that you want to kind of research when things go wrong and when there are deep unhappiness within a society, rather than trying to truly understand the opposite of that. Is that what are those fundamental drivers that make people happy? So what makes this complicated is that firstly, there are many competing theories and approaches. There are different ways in which you need to solve this. Human behavior and emotional research is largely contradictory. So that means that you can't just use one particular theory to solve a particular problem. You almost have to open, the way in which you deal with this. You find that the research in the field is mostly driven by human interpretation, and that the fact that the data points that are being collected are still basically in the early days of how we can interpret that to come up with new theoretical constructs. And then finding human subjects to participate in studies with you, in control studies, is a very difficult thing to do, because the problem with Dr. Heisenberg uncertainty principle is that once you've participated in a person's life on this topic of happiness, you have contaminated your subject, and that means that your entire observation becomes something that you can't really work with. So that means that you need to find alternative methods of data collection, and it's almost like the researcher needs to move from the field of sociology and social science into computational social science, and you need to come up with a new theory of what happiness could mean, and use that new theory of what happiness means in the context of a particular control test. And you just want to know that the measure of what you are trying to fix or what you are trying to influence has had a positive impact. And that then drives the kind of thinking typically. So that means that how do you translate then this pursuit of happiness, if it's a quantitative problem, into a technology? What does that mean? Does a technology mean that you got somebody asking better questions, somebody providing with better tools, somebody tracking you in a way that you can participate? What does that really mean in the context of the world of technology?